Welcome to the Life's Best Medicine podcast, where we are finding hope and healing one episode at a time. No appointment needed, no rubber gloves, and no coping. Just a healthy dose of life lessons to help equip you for this wild journey we call life. Hey everyone, this is a friendly reminder that we are here for entertainment purposes only. We may not even be that entertaining at times, but this is not medical advice. Talk to your doctor, check with your healthcare professionals before making any lifestyle changes or, medicine changes. What we're talking about is our clinical experience and what we've seen. And so if you really want our advice, you can consult us. You can actually consult me as a doctor, or you can consult my guest and get all your questions answered. But we can't give free medical advice, because we can't pay our bills with that, but we can help to educate you a bit and allow you to think a little bit. And always reach out to your medical professional before making any lifestyle changes. Thank you. Hello and welcome back to the Life's Best Medicine podcast. I'm kind of fortunate today. We got a hero of mine on, someone I've been kind of following on Twitter, another doc who's in the trenches, internal medicine doc. So I think we can kind of relate on that level. And also we were kind of seeing things that we've never seen in medicine before. And so we started questioning it. And I think in medicine, we were all taught to ask questions and try to figure out things and maybe see it from a different perspective. So Dr. Suneel Dhand, welcome, man. So good to have you.
Thank you, Brian, for that introduction. It is a pleasure to be here.
No, you were a guy, I remember sitting back going, oh, this guy's really talking like from the heart. And so, for people who don't know, give your background, like what possessed you to go into medicine? What were your motivations? What did you go through to get there? And what was it like when you got here?
Possessed me might be a good term, but I am at a stage now where I've been in practice for a few years in the United States. I didn't grow up in the US, as you may be able to tell. I grew up in the UK in a town just outside London. I went to medical school about 2 hours west, a city called Cardiff. And while I was in medical school, my eyes were open to the opportunity of training overseas. So the US was top of my list. I did my medical residency exams, the USMLE exams, while I was in medical school. I then worked for a year in the NHS before hopping across the pond. I did my internal medicine residency in Baltimore, and I finished there now back in 2008. It's been a while, actually. Since then, I have worked up and down the East Coast. I've had lots of different experiences, different types of healthcare institutions. I would say it's always been a huge interest of mine, the health, wellness, and preventive medicine field. But about 2 or 3 years into my practice, I'm an internal medicine doctor like yourself. I realized that so much of what I was seeing was simply related to lifestyle-related diseases. And you see the massive, massive impact on that. And I realized that as a society, we were not doing enough, particularly our public health, so-called public health institutions. I got very interested in health, well-being, preventive medicine. That was my main area of interest. I also did some outpatient work, but my main work was working as an acute care hospital physician in hospitals up and down the country. I then settled in Massachusetts. And then, lo and behold, 2020, COVID hit. And my whole perspective, my whole viewpoints on many different areas of medicine have drastically changed. But as far as COVID goes, I've worked in about 3 or 4 different hospitals at the COVID front lines. I've probably treated thousands of COVID patients. And I've seen the whole thing unfold, right from the spring of 2020 to now from a frontline perspective. And I think I'm much more uniquely placed to talk about the realities of COVID in terms of people being hospitalized than 99% of the talking heads on television, our so-called experts who don't even treat COVID patients.
Yeah, that was the shocker. So many that were leading the way had never seen a patient. They've never had the responsibility or had to sit down with a family member. And what was that like for you in early 20? Because I'm an outpatient doc, I know. And so I'm a little bit insulated from what you were seeing. And so I was picking up the phone and talking to my friends who were internists that were working in the hospital, hospitalists or intensive care docs. And, they had a different view than what a lot of people had what their perception was of what was happening. So It had to be a scary time for you. And what were you seeing, and what did you notice right away?
Well, I would say right from the beginning, I mean, when we first started hearing the stories about COVID-19, which was sweeping through the East and working its way westwards to Europe and then the US, something struck me as not quite right with the level of sensationalism when I was actually looking at statistics, how many people were surviving this, how many people were being affected, and what types of people were being affected. I thought the whole thing was blown out of proportion. Yes, there's a problem there. Of course, we don't want people to get sick. We don't want people to die. And I was calling this thing out in February, March 2020. I remember my social media posts. I remember going into back and forths with various colleagues, but I always believed that something wasn't quite right. And then in March 2020, I was actually, if I remember correctly, one of the first doctors in my hospital that actually treated a COVID-19 patient. And we were getting all these projections about how we were going to be annihilated with COVID-19. We were going to see thousands of people come in, and we were prepared. We emptied out the hospital. We stopped outpatient surgeries, and we stopped various other services. That never materialized in April and May. Yes, we did have COVID coming in. Yes, some of those patients were very sick. Most of them were successfully treated. Remember, this was a year before we even had the vaccines come out. I was seeing 80 and 90-year-olds recover from COVID-19. We had patients who did go to the ICU. Fortunately, I say fortunately, because I know that there were some pockets, a minority of pockets in the United States, like New York, where I actually worked a year later, certain boroughs which were heavily impacted by that initial wave. But where I was in the country, further up north, we were not drastically affected. So right from the beginning, I thought that this was something which was manageable. At the beginning, we were doing all sorts of things. I remember when we were getting all the ventilators ready for all of these patients to come in. We initially were treating with hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin per the direction of our infectious disease departments. This was in at least 2 or 3 different hospitals. That quickly stopped once it all became political. But I would say right from the beginning, to sum it up, I thought that the whole thing was vastly sensationalized by the media. We knew who we should be targeting. And I thought that most patients who were coming in, albeit some of them were sick, most of them were recovering and being discharged home.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is so many young people were so fearful. I see it now. I was at the gym the other day, and a 20-year-old guy, he's wearing a mask and gloves and stuff at the gym, and think, wow, they've really gone to his brain, because the odds of him getting it, or not of getting it, but of getting really sick, especially as time has gone on. I mean, going back, we're talking about a different beast that what you saw initially in the hospital than what we're seeing now with the mutations that happen with a virus.
Exactly. It is now thankfully a much more mild form of the virus. Mutations have occurred as they do with any virus, although this virus may not be entirely natural. That's another story. But right from the beginning, even the more severe strains, in terms of what I was seeing, most patients were doing okay and being discharged. Yes, it was worse than it is now, but you're talking to someone like yourself. You've been seeing sick patients for many years. And I should also add, although I was talking, obviously your question was directed to what I was seeing with patients I was treating. I actually got COVID-19 before we knew the pandemic had hit our shores. So in February, I got sick. I thought at the time the symptoms were quite mild. I took a day off work. That was it, because we didn't know that COVID was quite with us. And I was still working out in my gym, in my home gym. Most of the time, every day. I stayed in for one day. It took a couple of days to recover. I remember I felt better, and then a couple of days later, felt a little bit down, maybe for a day or so. But compared to previous illnesses I've suffered, like the flu, personally, I didn't think it was any worse than that. I did have this strange lingering dry cough afterwards, though, Brian, which I've never had before. It was just a weird dry cough. It would come on. And then when we knew that COVID was among us, I thought, I think I had COVID. I totally had COVID. I live in a big city, and those symptoms were very strange. So I got my antibodies tested in April time, and lo and behold, they were sky high. And that shaped a lot of my narrative as well, knowing that I had had COVID without knowing at the time that it was among us. And it was very mild, and I already had immunity post-infection.
Well, it's funny you say that because the same thing happened to me. I got it in the end of December 2019.
Wow.
And sick as a dog. I was actually sick for a few days. I had never been sick. My wife and kids have never seen me sick since med school. And I had to take a couple of days off work too. And they're like, wow, you must really, really be sick. And it turns out it was from one of my patients who he's a Porsche dealer, and his number one client was from Wuhan, China. So he called me and said,
Oh,
oh
okay.
my gosh, when some stuff started hitting, he said, oh my gosh, I think we got that dang thing they're talking about. So yeah, it's pretty amazing when we got it early, and then you start realizing, okay, it's survivable then.
Yeah, absolutely. And undoubtedly that will shape anyone's view of the whole thing. I sometimes think to myself, would things have been different? Would I have taken the vaccine if I hadn't had COVID? I mean, who knows? I mean, we're speculating here, but my views, I remember when I was first talking about it being sensationalized, I I hadn't yet got COVID. So I was already seeing these numbers. Then I got a bit sick. We knew that it was in Europe, but not quite in the US. And the reality is, which makes this whole thing even more ridiculous, it was already spreading like wildfire in December, January, and February. We just didn't know about it, and the media hadn't got hold of it yet. So they couldn't run on their cycle of perpetual fear. That all started from March and April, and it's been nonstop since then, with no perspective, no looking at other diseases and afflictions, which millions of people are suffering from. We can get into metabolic health in a bit. But the whole focus and drive on this, I could excuse a few weeks at the beginning, but I can't excuse anything after that. It's inexcusable. And how millions among us have been manipulated into astronomically high levels of fear is also inexcusable. And there have been so many different parties which have benefited from this ongoing state of fear, emergency, and pushing whatever other agendas they want to push.
Yeah, it's hard for us in medicine because, like I asked you at the beginning, like what made you go into medicine? What was your idealistic? What were you thinking? Hey, I'm going to be a doctor and here's what I'm going to do. And then what was the reality once you got there?
Well, what made me go into medicine actually was a personal story. So my uncle actually passed away of metastatic prostate cancer, and he was quite young. He was in his 50s. The whole thing happened very fast. I was 16, 17 years old. And I remember that having an absolutely profound effect on me and getting me into health, well-being, making me think more about disease. And then after that, I really wanted to get into the field. Plus other cultural factors as well. Obviously, since I was very young, this is a very Indian thing. You may know this. It is well thought. It is a very well-respected career to go into. I had that put into me right from the beginning. Oh, if you study hard, you can become a doctor. That's probably the best profession you can go into. But I toyed with all sorts of other professions. I wanted to be an airline pilot for a bit. Then I wanted to be a vet. I did my work experience when I was a teenager as a vet. But I think it was a combination of wanting to be in a scientific field, wanting to help people, and then that unique event. And despite all of the many negative things about the practice of medicine, some of which I'm sure we will talk about during this podcast, I wouldn't change a thing. I think there is a tremendous opportunity to do good. I think that we are overwhelmed right now with issues and agendas that have nothing to do with health and well-being. And it's up to us who went into it for the right reasons, really believe in health and well-being, and really believe in core values such as patient autonomy, informed consent. We are the sole standing soldiers against complete annihilation of the true meaning of medicine.
Yeah, it's quite remarkable. That was one of the things I really thought about because for me also, like you, I understood natural immunity. And once I had it, I said, okay, now I'm natural immunity. At first I was altruistic saying, hey, I'm not going to rush in and get a vaccination because other people who are in need, maybe diabetics, like they were rationing them out at first, like, hey, let the sickest of the sick get it first. But the idea that public health never said, hey, if you've already had it, let's put you at the end of the line. Like they made no distinction, and they really never mention it. I saw Fauci, 2 years in saying, oh yeah, I never really considered natural immunity, even though he had talked about it for years before this. So it's just such a disconnect that it's shocking for us.
Yeah, and I would say, Brian, that was the turning point that made me someone who was already very skeptical, with my skepticism growing over a year and a half, to really, I would say, turning against the medical establishment. When that happened, when I was placed in that position where I was being told that I needed to be vaccinated against COVID-19, and it was under coercion. And the ridiculousness of the interactions I got into with HR people when I'm the doctor, I'm the medically trained person who has been a doctor for many years. And I've got these people from HR who are simply following orders. You must be vaccinated no matter what. Now, thankfully, I was able to work things out with with the two main institutions that I work at, but I did actually get let go from a couple of other hospitals and clinics that I had contracts with. And I will never forget that. To me, this denial of natural immunity is akin to saying the earth is flat. I mean, what's going to be next? I mean, you're not just denying something small here. You are denying the very basis of evolutionary biology. Literally no species on this planet would even exist if there was no such thing as natural immunity. And how on earth did we go from medical and scientific establishments and institutions to being a place which is promoting the idea that natural immunity is irrelevant and doesn't exist? And when the US authorities started clamping down a few months after the vaccine was released, when we already had evidence that it was not going to stop transmission, it was not going to stop people getting infected, they then doubled down on this notion that everybody must be vaccinated. I was testing my antibody levels regularly, every couple of months. In my clinic, we had to do weekly finger prick tests, which were probably useless, but I'm sure they were enriching someone somewhere. But consistently, my IgG level was showing up, and I was testing it in terms of the number level as well, sky high for months and months. Maybe I got COVID again, didn't know it, had a very, very mild infection. But when I was placed in that position, Dr. Dhand, you must take this mRNA vaccine, which is a new product. It uses a mechanism that has never been used before. We've already got reports of side effects and adverse events. You're a doctor at the front lines. You take it against your better judgment. To me, that was not only an insult. It was not only a personal insult to tell me that. I thought that if I was put in a position where I felt like I had to do it, then what comes next? When your government, when authorities can make you do something as a doctor, which you know is not going to benefit you and is only going to result in a higher risk of side effects and adverse events. I'm in an at-risk group as well for that, with high antibody levels, somebody who's metabolically healthy, an athlete. What comes next? Once the government has taken that power away from you. So I decided I was going to take a stand. If necessary, I would have left the state of Massachusetts. I would have even left the country. I was not going to take that vaccine. I stood firm on that principle. And the fact that we still have segments of the medical establishment that are doubling down on this notion. They cherry pick some data from somewhere. There's a 0.01% improvement if you take a vaccine after natural immunity. I mean, it's utter nonsense. It's an insult to everybody's intelligence. The irony is, if they hadn't done that, if they had just been more reasonable, they probably would have had higher vaccine uptake. But when that happened, I was done. I was done with the US medical establishment.
Yeah, and that's the thing that people really need to understand. These people who are stepping down, these are nurses and doctors who've been in practice for all these years. You know, they're dedicated to their patients. And when they step down rather than taking it, you said, well, something's going on. Like, these people know something. They're not just going to take a stand unless they're seeing something and they have clinical knowledge and they have experience, right? Because if they're really fearful, they're going to say, I'll be the first in line.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, let's look at this from the standpoint of who I am. I've been a doctor for actually how long now? Because I qualified very early in the UK, almost 20 years. Actually a physician. I've been practicing in the US for 14, 15 years after residency. I've dedicated my whole life to helping patients. My area of interest is metabolic health and lifestyle medicine. The notion that I wouldn't do something that I thought would benefit my health. And I've got some 22-year-old with blue hair waving a placard, you must be vaccinated, and I listen to them over my own judgment, is again an insult. It's ludicrous. What a disgraceful state of affairs. It makes no sense whatsoever. And as I said, I was completely done with the US medical establishment after that. I still am done because I can see that this is not about health and well-being. When you have this one-size-fits-all approach that clearly does not make any sense whatsoever, and you're telling people who have good judgment, who have medical skills, to do things that are against their judgment, something is very, very wrong.
Yeah, and it's just like a car salesman when they're pushing something so hard. Remember, they were giving Krispy Kreme donuts and they're giving hamburgers and French fries to people, or saying, "Hey, we'll give you a free tuition if you get." I mean, they were pushing it so hard I've never seen that for the flu shot or for anything where they push the agenda so hard that you sit back and say, "Well, I wonder why." Those of us with common sense sat back and said, "This doesn't make sense."
Exactly. It doesn't make sense. Well, it doesn't make sense from a logical, common sense viewpoint if we, as doctors, Brian, are looking at it from the perspective of being a good doctor. But these people don't have that mindset. A lot of this goes back to when you take a step back, the establishments in the United States are totally in bed with Big Pharma. Big Pharma is in bed with the government. It all makes sense when you look at things from that perspective. Other countries where I'm from, the United Kingdom, never had any mandates. Yes, they did push it, they encouraged it, but they never had any mandates in the National Health Service. And there were a ton of doctors and nurses that didn't get vaccinated. It was a personal choice. And it makes even less sense when you think, here's a country, the United States, where what percentage of the population are uninsured? They can't get health insurance. You've got 70% of bankruptcies in the United States occur due to medical bills. You're telling me out of the blue, a country which has never given healthcare to its citizens, suddenly in 2020 cares so much and they want people to be vaccinated for their health and well-being. Give us a break. Seriously, who is stupid enough to believe that? There was obviously a massive financial conflict of interest situation going on right at the top. We all know what happens between the FDA, Big Pharma, big government. Goodness knows what kickbacks were involved at the top to push this vaccine, sell more and more products. That ultimately is what it was all about. Follow the money, the golden rule, Brian, as you know from following my Twitter.
Yeah, it's a hard pill to swallow, really, for us docs who've been around a while. And we started, see, us in metabolic health, we watched, Professor Noakes and Gary Fettke, what they went through.
Brilliant people, yeah.
Brilliant people, and they stood up to the establishment and said, "Wait a minute, here's who's dying, here's who's getting diabetes, here's what we can do." And it's funny because Fettke got it, and they said, you're a doctor, you can't talk nutrition. The Hippocratic Oath talks about metabolic health and talking about nutrition and lifestyle. That's our obligation. Like, we're not violating any morality by trying to help people to stay healthier.
Well, we're violating the morality of Big Pharma making tons of money. The founding father of medicine, Hippocrates, 2,500 years ago, let food be thy medicine, let medicine be thy food. Okay? One of the core statements that medicine was founded on. We've completely lost our way. And I'm glad that we're moving on to metabolic health, which is my interest. I would say the vast majority of patients that I treated with COVID-19 were over the age of 65. No doubt whatsoever, 80, 90%. I did not see one single patient under the age of 40 who was not obese. Not even one. We have an obesity crisis in the United States that the medical establishment is now complicit in, as far as I am concerned. They benefit from people being as obese as possible. What are we hitting now? 40% of the population actually clinically obese, a huge percentage of them morbidly obese. I really think people outside of America can't fathom the scale of the obesity problem. In fact, it's one of the first things people from the UK notice, including family members. They come to the US. I live in a low obesity state, but the first thing that they will notice is, my goodness, people are so big over here. And now there is a code of silence, not wanting to talk about obesity. They are trying to change definitions like body mass index. And it's an utter disgrace. This was the number one factor, probably why the United States suffered with COVID mortality. Ironically, it's the one factor which is in our control. And the reasons for not wanting to focus on obesity are very clear as well when you take a step back. Huge moneymaker, gastric bypass, $25,000 cost, money is made by the hospital. The medication industry for obesity is huge, but we're just trying to be like a bucket under a leaking roof. The roof is going to collapse because what's going into us is so toxic. And if COVID-19 was not an opportunity to seriously address this, Brian, we never are going to have another opportunity to address this. The fact that our obesity levels are sky high, 12-13% of the US is metabolically healthy. We're fast approaching a stage where sub-Saharan Africa now has an average citizen with higher metabolic health than the US. It is ultimately going to bring down our country. I love the US. I'm sure you do as well. I want the country to win. It is not going to win with 13% of the population metabolically healthy. And the medical establishment just sits there. Maybe you don't agree with me that they are as complicit as I think they are, but I think they totally are. If you had a population where 90% of the people couldn't read and write, who would you put that on? You'd say our education system is completely flawed. So the medical establishment, for them to just sit there, see these statistics, put no effort into a massive public health campaign is totally inexcusable. Doesn't surprise me though whatsoever. Things are just going to sadly keep getting worse because, again, COVID was the opportunity to address this and we did not take it.
Yeah, and you even said it, talking about Zithromax and hydroxychloroquine. These drugs we were using initially, they knew that's what was benefiting, and then they had to go with the common denominator of what the public health said. When doctors talked about vitamin D deficiency being linked, and we had studies to show it, zinc deficiency, all these things that were metabolic in nature, that, you know, even if you said, hey, let's go to the gym and exercise, anything like that, we got attacked. The only country that I know of who took a stand on that was El Salvador, of all places, saying, hey, look, you get metabolic health, you can do something now, because we had 3 years to correct things and things got worse under our watch.
They did. Let's close gyms. Let's encourage people to eat more takeout and let's stay completely silent about it. That was the attitude of the medical establishment.
And we kept the bars open, but we closed the churches, right? And it just,
exactly.
So many of these things are amazing that we saw, and you sit back and, you know, I think as people with common sense, if we question it, we got attacked. When we said, hey, what happens if that PCR testing isn't as accurate as everyone thinks it is, you're right? Because it really led us down a bad road.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, so many things were not quite right, but we had this narrative there, and it just shows how the worldwide media is all coordinated. And it gets worse than what we're talking about. It's not just the fact that we knew all of these things, and it was very obvious with data that metabolic health was playing a role. It was the fact that even when we found the data, it was twisted and there was more misinformation. Case in point, diabetes linked with COVID-19. I can't tell you the number of patients that I saw, and they hadn't received healthcare for a long time. They didn't interact with doctors. They hadn't had tests done. We found out that their blood sugars were sky high. They were obese. They were probably insulin resistant for 10, 20 years. It was all building up. So we see these statistics. Diabetes gets diagnosed with COVID-19. So instead of the medical authorities telling the truth and saying, hey, we have a pandemic of insulin resistance, it's not a good idea to have high blood sugar, because if you do, you'll be at higher risk of severe infection. Simple message. But no, what do the authorities, including the CDC, do? You know what they did? COVID causes diabetes, another reason to get vaccinated. It's sickening. It's sickening. It just almost sends shivers down my spine to think how sick they can get. That there's the opportunity to promote a message of insulin resistance being a pandemic, but they totally miss it. They use it to promote a different agenda.
Yeah, and that was remarkable. I've sat down with some of the leaders, you know, Brian Tyson being one of them here, and Peter McCullough. I said, who, you know, just off the record, we were talking. I said, who's going to die? Like, what's your worst patient? And it was the same thing, the high sugars, metabolically sick, you know, and it's just so frustrating that was never addressed. It was just never addressed. And so knowing that we can intervene and help people to prevent them from getting hospitalized, it's shocking. And like you're saying, that, you know, the other thing that was an eye opener for me is when I started seeing all these falsified studies, you know, saying that ivermectin was killing people. And you look at the studies and how they were done, you say, gosh, you'd have to be an absolute idiot to give those doses, or wait till they're on the ventilator, then give it to them. I mean, it was set up to fail. And when you saw this, I thought something was really wrong. This is a generic drug. Why are they going out of their way to call it horse paste? Or, I used it a lot when I was in the third world to help people with parasites.
Yeah.
Things like that we use these drugs for, for lupus. And so if you wrote the prescription for lupus, it wasn't dangerous. But if you wrote for something else, it was dangerous all of a sudden.
Yeah, like hydroxychloroquine, which we've been prescribing for years now. I mean, the score, Brian, as a physician, and the reality of medicine hits. Viruses are very difficult to treat. It's not going to be like an antibiotic, but the political nature of the vitriol towards certain drugs, when they produce drugs like Paxlovid, which the studies were very iffy. They were never initially tested on the target groups that they're now targeting. And they bend, they twist data, they use relative risk reduction to go all in with medicines like that and completely reject others, which are probably just as, if not more effective, if you actually studied them. It just shows, again, it's about money making for the Pfizer, for the Moderna products. And they will design whatever studies they can. They have a mainstream media, which is toe to toe with them. They are in lockstep, and they are just as equally corrupt. So it's the establishment game. It is the game of the establishment. Very few of us can take a step back and realize what's going on, but it's up to us to have a very strong voice, because if people like us are not here, then what's left? And there is a desire, there's a hunger out there, because I think the American people, the British people as well, deserve much better than to have authorities that let them down every single day and are riddled with conflicts of interest. And a lot of people out there know it, and the message has not been brought to them about what's really gone on and how many people have enriched themselves, and they're laughing all the way to the bank. They got more power, they got more control, and they're sitting pretty because they own the establishment.
So what do we do? What do us docs who sit back and say, man, because it's easy to, for me, this whole thing, and I really hate to make the connection, but there, it's valid, is that, I've been watching a lot about Nazi Germany, and you say these people just turned a blind eye. And I always, my whole life, having German heritage, I thought, how could you have not said something? How could you have not said something when you see something happening? And now I see a lot of doctors who will email me behind the scenes or text me behind the scenes, tell me what they're seeing, but they won't say anything, and they're afraid to. And so some, Asim Malhotra and some others that stood up, you think, uh-oh, they're going to have a target on them. But if all the doctors stood up and said, look, here's the honest truth of what we're seeing, it would change the game. It really, when you look at like you said, the funding, I mean, it's so devastating to look at how's the FDA funded, the CDC, World Health Organization, and you see that all the inbreeding, it's just hard for us to accept.
Yeah, it's a very sorry state of affairs. I mean, on an optimistic note, we do live in a time with social media, with the internet, where people can hear alternative points of view spread much more easily. And that's why people like us have an online platform. That we wouldn't have had that. We would have been completely at the mercy of the establishment figures. All we can do is our best to keep promoting our message, hope that Elon Musk takes over more platforms, and we can speak our truths and make people realize that the people who claim to protect them and be all about their health and well-being are totally not about their health and well-being. But I do think that there's a hunger out there. And I feel very sorry for many doctors, especially early career doctors. Think about it. I mean, we take the United States, you're hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. You're in servitude virtually to a corrupted system. You're not going to rock the boat. It takes a lot to rock the boat. Even in the UK, where there are not those same debt levels, you still have that same fear, government control. You will rarely see a group of people more controlled than physicians. And I don't want to be overly critical. I mean, I'm sure you're the same. Most of my friends are doctors. And I think most frontline doctors want to do the right thing, but they are trapped within a system. I do think as a whole, as a profession, doctors need to step up. They need to be more critically thinking. And at some stage, they have to think to themselves, I'm talking about the US here, look what's happened to the state of medicine. We've gone from a state of independent practitioners 30, 40 years ago, who basically would tell Medicare what they wanted. They would run the show. They were in charge of things, to completely surrendering the profession. And that could never have happened without weak and cowardly leadership. Could never have happened. But we are seeing the results of having leaders who are cowardly, who are pathetic, who are sellouts. And it's very unfortunate, because ultimately, who loses? The patient.
And that's a big thing. And, I was in the system for 18 years. I left during COVID. As a matter of fact, I resigned in January of 20 and started my practice here in July. But it wasn't because of COVID. It was just, I was done with the system. Because looking at metabolic health, I go, look, you got 10 minutes with a patient. Guess what? I would spend, you can't talk about metabolic health in 10 minutes and address all the issues. So I would work through lunch every day. And then I was, not coming home until late every night, because I'm trying to help my patients, then do the callbacks and dealing with the hassles of medicine, as you know. And so, at some point, I think that's kind of what happened, is the doctors are so busy and burdened. They're seeing 50, 60 patients a day in some cases. And how do you possibly read up on what's going on? How do you double check what the CDC is telling you? How do you not, really, I mean, the system is so overwhelmed that the last thing you want to do is learn about metabolic disease or something like that when you're under the fire hose all the time.
You can't. It's a vicious circle. I mean, I try to do what I can. I'd like to think I'm in a specialty where I do reverse things very quickly. As an acute care physician, somebody comes in with sepsis or an MI or a bad case of cellulitis, COPD, we reverse things and then we let them go. And everything else is, as an outpatient, I try to do what I can in terms of talking to some patients about their lifestyle, but obviously time is very limited, which is why I do everything, including my personal coaching on the side. But most specialties out there, so much more could be done, but we are a sick care system, and doctors, medical schools have that philosophy that we let people get sick before you come to us. And eventually there probably will be some type of breaking point, but goodness me, how many other agendas do we have right now that want to ensure that society goes more into a state of degeneracy and illness, and people's physical and mental health continues to go absolutely down the drain. We haven't got the right leaders at the top, the right sort of philosophy that wants to grab the bull by the horns and say, we must change things. We cannot continue down this path of people becoming sicker, fatter. And it's not just physical health, mental health is a huge issue as well. Everything is in a vicious cycle with the establishment and all of the other interests that are making money. But there will be a tipping point at some time in the future.
Yeah, and I think now is the tipping point. I really do. The more people I talk to, they don't trust us doctors anymore. They don't trust the establishment. They're seeing what happened to their family members. They're seeing what happened to their friends. And, I think the hesitancy comes from when people stop listening to what they're told they're seeing and start saying, what am I seeing really? What am I seeing? And observing that as docs, that's what we do. We observe from the moment that patient walks in the room. Are they depressed? Are they anxious? Are they stressed? What's going on in life? We can just in a few seconds know what's happening with that patient, if they're in a good spot or not, And so many people have just lost that skill. We're just like saying, okay, your blood pressure's high. Here's a pill. Oh, you have this, here, diabetes, here, take this. But no one talks to them about change, what you can do to have control without a drug.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's very sad. And I'm glad you mentioned the word observation there, because that is the core of good medicine, observation. And this is why the last 3 years have been so utterly demonic in so many ways, because if the job of a doctor is to at first observe and then say what they see, then think about all of the doctors who've been blocked with saying their truth and exactly what they're seeing, whether it's to do with who's being affected by COVID, whether it's to do with vaccine side effects. It's all very 1984 when you can't speak what you're actually seeing. You have to go with something else that is being propagated by another narrative, but is not what you're seeing at all. Real tragedy there. But observation, I agree, is the fundamental core of being a good doctor.
Well, and also if you think about it, if you're at work somewhere and someone's slandering you or bad mouthing you, like if someone's saying something untrue about me, first thing I'm going to do is say, let's sit down in a room and let's talk it out. Right. And see where, because when it's slander, so what I'm saying is public health should have said, hey, let's call in these crazy doctors who are making these claims. Let's sit down in a public forum and prove them wrong. No one ever did that. Did Fauci
Nope.
ever sit down with someone and say, hey, McCullough, this guy's nuts, even though he's the most published doctor on earth. Let's pull him in and let's have a public discussion so I could set him straight, right? Scott Atlas, all these people who stood up to the system, no one wanted to debate them, right?
No, of course not.
And no one wanted to touch him. No one wanted to talk to him. And so you start saying, how come no one wants to talk to these guys?
Yep. And this is a historical bad aspect of our entire profession. This has been going on for hundreds of years. You have entrenched power structures, and they are not interested in hearing alternative points of view. And think about all of the crazy things that we've seen happen over the last couple of hundred years, whether it's denying that infection comes from pathogens, whether it's denying the ill effects of smoking, whether it's, I wouldn't say denying, but rather misrepresenting certain drugs like statins, which have come across and generated billions in the last few decades. All of these things, that the pattern is the same in terms of the entrenched power structure being there. A few doctors, starts with one or two, then more will come out and start asking more questions, raising concerns, and then eventually there'll be a critical mass, and then something will finally be acknowledged. This is a historical trend, and it's a very bad side to the medical profession, that for people who claim to be all about true science and real medicine, that they have this attitude at the top rather than debate. Let's shut this person down. Again, it's truly pathetic, but that is how they behave. Let's shut that person. Fauci did that with Dr. Bhattacharya. This is a fringe scientist. Let's shut him down. Let's do everything possible with our buddies in corrupted US big tech to block what he's saying so nobody can see. That's their playbook. It's very unfortunate. And again, the patient loses.
And we lost during the lockdowns. We lost our social contacts. You know, we saw seniors dying faster because they had no one to talk to. They were lonely, depressed. I mean, one of the biggest causes of mortality besides metabolic disease was depression and anxiety. Huge risk factor for dying of COVID. So all these things have just taken away people's hope and their, you know, their human connection. It's inhumane.
It is. Inhumane is a good word. I mean, still in most hospitals in the US, you can't visit a relative who has COVID-19. I mean, why? Why would they do that now? Just put on an N95. The most basic thing to every society since the dawn of time is when your loved one is sick, the family stays with them, encourages them, gives them hope. And we're denying that. Still, most hospitals, as far as I'm aware, in the US do not allow relatives to come in if the patient has COVID-19. Inexcusable.
Yeah, and plus the family had no say on medications management, all those kind of things, and just to be there for the family member. I mean, it's just incredible to me. And I think we saw so many things. You know, those of us who just said this doesn't make sense. Like, you know, in California, you couldn't sit on the beach. You could walk on the beach, but you couldn't sit on the beach. They closed down all the trails where who goes hiking next to each other? No one does that. I'm not going to go up to some stranger and walk with them on a hike. Everyone's socially distanced, but you could be in a restaurant 6 feet apart. But if only if you're outside, but then they'll go outside and build a canopy and fence the whole thing. I mean, you know, it's all enclosed, but it was outside, but it's a tent. Like with no circulation, you'd be safer inside with the circulation, right? Of the ventilation systems and everything. So when we saw this craziness, you thought, wow, like 6 feet apart, but then you sit right next to the person at dinner. But if you walked in, you had to wear the mask until you sat down, then it was safe.
Yeah. I've lost count of the number of times, Brian, I've said this doesn't make sense. And a lot of my faith in humanity has been destroyed. I remember I had one incident. This was in, I think it was actually beginning of 2021, where I was hiking. We were on a trail just outside Boston, and someone was approaching us on the other side of the trail, like probably about 20 feet between where we were walking the path and where he was walking. And he walked, and then he looked and he saw us walking past 20 feet away, outdoors, beautiful day. Okay. And he quickly like grabbed something from his pocket. I didn't realize what he was doing. And then he got his mask, he put it on. Okay. And then I think there was an issue with the mask, like it going on. He couldn't get it on. So then he put it down. I think he may have thrown it on the ground. And then he got his t-shirt and put it over his face. Seriously, he did that. He did it for about 10 seconds as he walked parallel to us, 20 feet away. I was a bit worried for a second because there was a big ledge there. I thought he might like fall off the hill or something while he did that. Fortunately, he did not. But to think that this person had had it instilled in them that whenever they see another human, they have to have their face covered for their own safety. And nothing clicked in his mind to say, does this make sense? Why am I doing it outdoors? These people are 20 feet away from me. I'm in the middle of like a big forest. Nothing clicked in his mind. It's like a complete block there.
Well, and that's the other
we've
connection.
All seen things like that. I mean, human beings can be programmed and trained to do everything. And the elites, the establishment at the top, have known this since the beginning of time. That's how they've got my last video. I talked about this, a recent movie I watched. That's how you get millions of people to sign up to go fight in a war and essentially go die at the front lines when the person that they're fighting against poses no risk to them at all. This has been done since the beginning of time, this manipulation. I'm glad you touched upon Nazi Germany because that's a huge area of interest of mine as well. I know you've got German heritage. You visited Germany, I presume.
Yes.
Before, yeah. Me too. I've been to Germany before. I've been to Eastern Europe, Poland a few years ago. I went to Krakow, went to Auschwitz, and the horrors of that place, you don't truly realize till you get somewhere like that and you know everything that built up to that particular point. And at the time, Germany was thought of as one of the most civilized countries in the world, and it descended to that level of evil. And that's a big wake-up call to everyone. A few years after I was in Krakow, we visited Israel, actually, and we went to the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem. And there was a Jewish person that gave our tour. And at the end of our tour, she said, I will never forget her words. She said, you've all seen something very, very harrowing. And I hope you will all remember what you've seen and the lessons that we've taught you today. But our lesson to the world can be summed up in 2 words. Be vigilant. That's it. Be vigilant.
Yeah,
because humans,
yeah, and that's the thing is
goosebumps. Humans are capable of insanity. Everybody presumes. I mean, all these woke crazies now think that if they were in Nazi Germany, they would have been on the side of wanting to hide somebody like Anne Frank, or if they were in the Netherlands, wherever they were. But it's not true. Very few people. I think it's people like us who stand against the establishment that would have done that. Those crazies who went along with the narrative would have been there marching and doing their Hitler salutes. Of course they would. We all know that. They don't know it. That's the big problem.
That's an absolute truth. And that's the thing is when you start saying, okay, you see other people as vermin, like that guy was so fearful that you were going to be a diseased people out hiking, you know, and if you have common sense and you're sick, you're not going to be out hiking and coughing and sneezing on people. And so hopefully that's one thing. And really, I would hold public health because to some account for this too, because they said, and I saw it in my own practice, where people said, well, once you get the shot, you don't have to worry about ever getting it. And these people would have sick cough and they go to class, they go to work, they go, it's like, well, I can't get it. Well, yes, you can. I've seen enough cases where you can. I knew this early on that you were still going to get it. And so that's it. But I think the bigger point is when you start scapegoating people, marginalizing them, you know, we've all been called names, you know, you're an anti-vaxxer. It's like,
I've been called everything you can imagine.
And I'm waiting for the data. And I go, hey, I'm looking at Israel. And I'm not seeing data that I like. And so we sat back and we watched the craziness develop. And you think, well, if Israel all of a sudden had a 90% cure rate, you go, okay, great. It's looking good. But it wasn't looking good. It was getting worse. And we saw that. And so, you know, then they stopped presenting certain data. And then, but I think that the big thing is, look, when people are in fear, they don't use rational thought anymore. They're fearful. And, you know, you're a threat to them. Like that guy, you were a threat to him, you know, just because you could have infected him, got him sick. And then, and I think the other thing that we realize is this concept of the greater good. Of course, we want the greater good, but what was happening, and this made me really sad for medicine, is doctors were celebrating the fact they were going on social media saying, this guy wouldn't get vaccinated, so I fired him as a patient. People were cheering that. That's abandonment, because they have a risk and benefit, and they've assessed that, and they say, here's what I'm going to do. But the problem for the greater good was like, you're killing grandma, and it was all based on false logic, false data. They didn't have the data to say that.
Yep. Human nature and groupthink are very dangerous indeed. And I remember all of those posts. I remember all of those doctors that were some even were celebrating when their patient who didn't get vaccinated got COVID. I mean, it's a tragedy of human nature and societies that when you permit marginalization and you allow it and it becomes acceptable, people will do it. People will do it. It's us versus them. I mean, the greater good concept is one of the most evil terms I can imagine, because it has been so manipulated throughout history. Do you think that Nazi attendant in the concentration or extermination camp hadn't had it programmed into them that they were doing the greater good? They wouldn't be there if it hadn't been programmed into them. So it can be manipulated, and it can be used for the most evil things that you can imagine. And it's a recurrent theme. And I don't think that this will ever change, because it's something which is in human beings. All we can hope is that with enough people who are awake in this age of social media, more people can be alert to it. And the fact that no matter what, no matter how many people try to pretend like it doesn't exist, we are protected by the greatest constitution in the world that will allow us free speech and to speak. However much people try to shut that down and change things, that sacred text is still there, allowing us free speech.
Yeah, it's going to be a battle. I mean, we all take risks. I think, that's one of the, I just quoted Bonhoeffer, in Germany, who stood up and actually tried to get Hitler killed. He said, look, they said, why are you doing it? You're going to die or you're going to go to prison. He said, at least my kids won't think I'm a coward for the rest of my life. Like where your kids will look at you, at least you stood up for something that you believed in, and tried to do the right thing. We could be wrong on certain issues, and we're going to be wrong on certain issues, but you really, I think when you hold the patients, that we hold them up and say, we want to help our patients and do the best to our ability. And if new information comes out, then we change tact. But I think in medicine, what I've seen is some people have all the data in front of them and they won't look at it. I just heard a debate on the vaccination, and the doctor said, well, I never looked at any of that data. Well, hell, that's your job. Look at the data if you're going to debate someone on this topic. Here's studies because the studies don't agree with what you believe, so you don't want to see it. And that's the problem we're running into in medicine. It's just incredible.
Yep, and we're running into, and we have run into, the fact that most doctors don't look at data. They don't read studies themselves. One of the most disgraceful aspects of this pandemic, I would say, and this is on the doctors, I don't think most doctors out there have even read the original vaccine studies. I actually wrote in December 2020, I wrote a blog post about the vaccine trial, and I raised the issue of absolute risk reduction. I raised the issue of the fact that many people who were at risk were left out. They were excluded from the study. And I said at the end, people are still going to get COVID. This is very obvious because I've read the paper, and we're going to have people with side effects, and it may help us to live with the illness, but it's not going to take COVID away. I face so much flack for that article. Okay, I'm at the stage where I don't listen to that. I have put forward my view, and I've done it logically. And then we had all of these doctors posting pictures on social media. I've been vaccinated. The end. This is the end of the pandemic. And I would talk to some of these doctors, this is months into it, and say, did you read the study? And overwhelmingly, the answer was no. That's completely inexcusable. Think about this. Doctor, I'm talking to a doctor. This is the single biggest medical story of your lifetime. You are at the front lines. A therapeutic, a vaccine has come out claiming that it's going to have a huge effect, and they're now mandating people to do it. Have you read the study? No. And I can guarantee you, and you know this is true as well, Still, if you ask most doctors in the US, they have not read the study. And that speaks volumes for our profession and the state we are in. And there's no other way for me to put this as complete laziness and inability to critically think, want to investigate on the part of doctors. And this is doctors' fault, because I can't think of any excuse for not reading the actual study for this drug, which you're so vehemently promoting and you're on board for mandates. How on earth could you even look me in the eye and tell me you haven't read the study? It's a joke. It is a joke. All I've got to say about that.
Yeah, no, I think it's so it really is frustrating. It is, because we were vilified for saying what we were seeing and observing, and knowing doctors. I know doctors who are injured and they still couldn't say anything because they were in a system. They had injuries, cardiomyopathy, atrial fibrillation, heart attack, stroke, and I saw it and I talked to them and I go, "Well, did you say something?" And they said, "No, I can't say anything. If I do, I'll get fired."
And
It's
they'll
incredible.
probably get vaccinated again, some of them, and get another stroke or heart attack. What can you do with a robotic mind like that? I mean, I hate to say it, but there's no reasoning. You can't reason with somebody who has that type of mindset.
No, these guys, they knew it. They saw it. They just couldn't say anything because they knew. They were like, "No, I'm done." But they couldn't say anything on online social media. They were actually getting, one of them I know, because I interviewed for the podcast, said, "I was getting flack from my own hospital for not going on social media and pushing it." And he said, "Well, crap, I just got injured. What am I going to do? Push on other people?" So it's hard because, and I think the reality is going to show, like, we knew what we were seeing in the hospital. We knew what we were seeing in clinic. We knew these things, and it's hard. So yeah, it's just like tying it back to Nazi Germany. Not that we're heroes. It's just saying, hey, look, someone has to stand up, because more and more doctors now I see are coming forward saying, yeah, here's what I'm seeing. Here's what I'm seeing.
Slowly but surely. Yeah.
They see the writing on the wall at this point, but it's such a system that everyone's afraid. I'm still afraid. I don't like to deal with this stuff. I just want to go take care of my patients and be quiet, but we owe it to people. It's the same mindset. And this mindset of Nazi Germany, I understand now why people didn't say anything, because if you fly under the radar, you turn in your neighbor, you're in good standing, and you don't have to worry. You can go work on your farm and go do your thing and go on with life and not have to deal with being in front of a firing squad.
It's a slave mindset, and it's very sad, and very very evil forces can take advantage of it. You said something a few minutes ago, Brian, about we accept that we could be wrong. Absolutely. I mean, I'm a humble person, as certain as I may sound about certain things. There are many, many things that I would say, yes, up for debate. Debate me on this issue, why somebody metabolically healthy with high antibody levels should get a vaccine. I will debate. Okay, my mind could be changed with overwhelming data, but there are some things which I do not accept that we can be wrong on. Give you some principles. We cannot be wrong on the principle of informed consent. We cannot be wrong on the principle of patient autonomy. And we cannot be wrong that when you observe something in medicine, you say it out loud. There is no way to be wrong on those issues. Those are concrete. And all three of those have been completely breached over the last 3 years. And it has made me disgusted with our profession.
Yeah, medical ethics 101. That's what I've been saying all along. Look, risk and benefit. My job's not to scare you out of something or scare you into something and say, let's look in your case scenario. Here's your odds, right? Because when people are fearful, it's just like anyone. I've always made that point. Is like, okay, if there's a fire in your building, right? Our job as doctors is to say, okay, it's a small fire in the kitchen and you're on the 34th floor. Jumping doesn't make sense, right? If it's a huge inferno and you're on the first floor, you say, yeah, jump out the window. So, it's our job to assess the risk and benefit of everything. And that's why I was 100% against mandates, whether the vax worked or not. I mean, going 3 years without being able to say the word vax. We couldn't say that word. We say, oh, that thing, the shot. To go that long and just say, hey, look, here's what we're saying. And then they changed the definition of vaccination.
Yeah,
and no one
shady. I mean, who does that? How do you get to change a long established scientific definition, which has been taught for decades in medical school? It suddenly changes and the medical community is completely silent. How does that even happen? How do you change a definition in science? Astonishing. And they got away with it.
Over and over, multiple times. There's multiple things. The definition is different than what we learned. So yeah, all these things. I'm so really. I mean, and I know you're at risk being in. Well, I'm at risk living in California. You're at risk working for a hospital system, right? So
yeah, exactly.
What was your like? What made you say, okay, I got to say something? because you know there's risk there.
Yeah.
You know there's going to be people that don't like you at work, and there's going to be management saying, how do we get rid of this guy? He's a, you know, he's a big mouth. What do you do?
Of course. Well, I like to try to stick with facts. I like to back everything that I'm saying with evidence. I like to emphasize that what I do at work is very different from how I talk online, where I'm exercising my right as a US citizen to free speech. And it's interesting you asked me that, Brian, because I would say I've had probably 50 times more people come up to me at work and say that they love what I'm saying and they completely agree. I mean, maybe I could count on one hand the number of negative comments I've had where people say they don't agree with me. Because I know that the reality is people who are on the ground, who are having thoughts, are very different from what the mainstream establishment is promoting, etc. I have got friends, I've been around long enough where I have friends who are high up in management as well. But I like to separate the two. Obviously, as a professional, I have my job where I go to work, I do my job, I follow protocols. People ask me a question, I answer it, I take care of patients to the best of my ability. And I try to keep my online presence completely separate from work. But I would say I've had more positive comments, including from people very high up in administration, actually. I don't work in any teaching hospitals. I think I would be done if I worked in any teaching hospital. I'm more in the community. But you never know what's around the corner. I will stand firm on my principle. You never know what corrupt string may be pulled at the top to say, get rid of that doctor. But I think that may backfire on them. I think it may get me more publicity if something happens with a hospital or the Board of Medicine. Let them do it. Let them do it. I will defend my stand to the very end. And I'll do it with more publicity if they go down that route, because I don't think anything I'm saying is against science or against medical ethics. Whereas I do think everything that they are for is that many things are against science and medical ethics. I think I'm in the right. Let that debate play out in public if it ever happens.
Yeah, and I would agree that that would be the dumbest thing they could do, honestly. And I've had a lot of conversations with my wife and family and friends about that. Is look, discovery will be brutal. We have the data. We have the data. We know what we saw. We have the records. We have the receipts. So it's one of those things, and we know medical ethics. And so in a time of fear that people have canceled medical ethics, it's unreal in medicine. And there has to be a changing of the guard, because we cannot allow this. I think people are going to have to step down from positions of authority. I really do, because they violated the Hippocratic Oath. They violated our medical ethics 101 that we all know going into medical school. No one can say they don't know about patient autonomy, right? Or informed consent. But to say I can only say the good part of it, not the bad part, it's just not right. And everyone knows that. I think as time goes on, out of fear, I get it. At the beginning, they said you're hurting the cause if you say anything. And I was very quiet at the beginning, by the way, because I'm like, okay, I don't know yet. Let me just see. But when people would ask me at the very beginning, is this safe and effective? Are there long-term problems? I'd say, I don't know. I don't know. That's the honest answer, because we don't know.
Yeah, tell the truth.
I can't tell you if something just came out this week that it's going to be not going to cause a problem in 10 years, right? I'm not going to say it does, but I'm not going to say it doesn't either. So all I can say is I don't know. So when all these people have this confidence to say it's safe and effective long-term, you think, how can you say that? What are you basing that on? And we saw there was no data. I couldn't get the data. I wanted to see it and go, let me look at the numbers. And you want to wait 75 years to release stuff for us doctors to give informed consent? Total disaster.
Yeah, exactly. Now, do you have a lot of conversations now with you being in California where you are more concerned with this new law has been enacted, right, Brian?
Yeah, it goes into effect in a week, January 1st, right? AB 2098 for people.
Some conversations potentially.
Yeah, I think
you probably know who you're talking to, though.
Yeah, I think when you look from a medical perspective, the California Medical Board has a lot of attorneys and not very many doctors. So it's a kind of a crazy situation we're in. Like, I wouldn't go to a legal conference and tell them the law, right? So when you start understanding, I think, as you said, the Constitution is very clear. We have the right to free speech. If we're wrong, people don't come to us anymore, right? If we're wrong, people say these people are dangerous.
Yeah.
So if you're right, right, even if you're wrong, you have the right to free speech. So to tell doctor, and the other thing I would say is we're protected under whistleblowers, saying, look, if I see something bad, I have an obligation to say something. If I see a new drug
Yeah.
coming out and people are having heart attacks from a new drug, and I don't say anything, oh yeah, I had 7 people have a heart attack last week and I didn't say anything, right? You're protected as a whistleblower when you start saying, everyone who had this certain thing or there's eating a certain way or whatever, we have an obligation to say something. So yeah, I think we're protected. I really do. And I think it's people, I think most people, when you look at it, they look and say, this is insanity. Otherwise you would never have a second opinion. Doctors have always had a second opinion where you say, hey, I see it this way, you see it this way, let's try it and see what happens, right? But to say only one side is the dominant force, we're going back to the ice ages.
Oh, we are, yes. And fortunately, doctors like us who have been around for a bit longer can be more reasonable and more confident in that. I feel especially sorry for the younger doctors coming through, and they are total strong arm tactics. I mean, let's talk about the American Board of Internal Medicine. You must have got that email which went out in mass in the summer of 2021 saying,
I posted it and said, this is BS.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Misinformation will be all over you. And I'm thinking to myself, I've been a doctor for a few years. We have a healthcare system that is in crisis. In our state, we have premiums going through the roof. We've got massive pandemics of other issues. Never once have I seen you be all over anything. And it speaks volumes that now all of a sudden you have this huge level of energy and vigor. It's a complete joke again. Seriously, you've never done anything ever.
We're releasing where their funding's coming from.
Where has this come from?
This people have to look and see this.
Be passionate about something. You're not passionate about anything else. And now you come to me in the middle of 2021 and tell me we're passionate about stopping misinformation against your own people.
Well, not only that, the logic of this, we have a doctor shortage, and we all know that. And we have a shortage of medical providers. Now, in California, you start going after your doctors, the good doctors who are smart and stand up to the system. And then you get a mass exodus because everyone says, oh, I don't want to deal with that. They're gone. Then what?
Yeah, and you can go to the next state. Yeah. Exactly.
The other states will be very happy about it, but it would be a really dumb move, honestly, from a medical perspective. And to make the point of how things when people jump on a bandwagon and don't think, when they said, okay, if you're a doctor or nurse and you're not vaccinated, even though you already had COVID and we know about natural immunity, we're going to fire you. In the middle of a pandemic, when you don't have enough staffing. And then they said, okay, if you're sick, you can still work. If you have COVID, you can still work. None of that made sense. It doesn't make sense. They actually are sick. You want people who are healthy that don't have the condition to be fired, but you're going to let people who are sick with the condition or afraid of work? Made no sense.
No, absolutely not.
And then we went from a 2-week,
our favorite phrase.
And it was that whole thing is that we went from a 2-week lockdown, then it was 3 days. So they keep changing. Like, we can't stop the hospital. What are we going to do? Okay, we don't have to quarantine for 2 weeks anymore. We'll go shorter time because we need people to work. What are you going to do? It's just, the whole thing has been crazy.
It has been. And I think we're coming out of it. We're almost there. But those same people, I'm going to use the phrase, be vigilant in a completely different way here. But those same people who inflicted those horrors and nonsensical rules are still all there. You talked about needing a complete cleanup. Absolutely. I don't think you could get a bigger swamp than healthcare. And if there was ever a swamp that needed to be drained, it is a system that we work in. But let's make no mistake. Most people, thankfully, are living normal lives. I know I am right now and have been for a long time. But those same people with their agendas are there by the sidelines, and they will use any excuse possible to bring back rules. We're talking about mask mandates now for kids in Massachusetts with the new governor coming in January. So the fight is still very much on. And I know you're up for the fight, Brian. I'm certainly up for the fight. We're not going to go anywhere. And we have to keep standing up for good medicine. And we have to keep exposing the authorities and the establishment for what they are.
Yeah, it's just a turning of the tide. I think at some point you get enough voices, and that's why I did Low Carb MD, to say, hey, there's a lot of doctors who understand metabolic health. Let's not be 5 of us who get attacked. Let's let it be 5,000 or 50,000, right? That spreads out the targets a lot better. And so guys like you who step up, I really appreciate it. So I have to ask you, what's life's best medicine for you, Suneel? What is like gets you going when things are hard? What keeps you moving or standing up when things are tough? Like, what's life's best medicine for you?
Life's best medicine. That is a great question. Well, I think the number one rule of life before you even focus on anything else is to try your best to stay healthy. So the pillars of a healthy lifestyle: food, a fresh, whole diet, very low in processed foods, ideally eliminate those, low in sugars. I also believe in minimizing carbohydrates, but there are certain other principles which I won't get into here, but basically eat healthy as you can. Number 2, exercise as much as you can. My rule is 1 hour a day of exercise, whether it's cardio, weights, certain parts of the body, 1 hour a day. And while you do that, you should be completely detached. So no looking at emails, no answering messages, listen to music. Something I'm in now is listening to podcasts during that time. That's my hour. And that hour, which I advise for any patient, often I will give that advice and they will say, how on earth can I spare an hour a day? And I will say, well, how long do you spend watching TV? How much time do you waste? Because that hour of exercise is going to have enormous spillover benefits: improved concentration, it'll give you more energy, it will help you sleep better. So many to even mention, as well as being a mood boost. The third thing is everything you can to de-stress in your life. Having chronically elevated adrenaline and cortisol levels, extremely detrimental for your health. You don't want to do that. Whatever it is to help you relax, meditation, a hobby, getting your mind away from things, focus on that every day. And sleep. People forget that. Too many people chronically undersleep, have to get enough sleep. So I'll say those 4 main pillars, but many different branches stem from those. And in terms of keeping going, I think having a mission, having principles is extremely important. We've touched upon that during this podcast. Know clearly what you want to do in life, what your goals are, what you believe strongly in. Do something you're absolutely passionate about that. All of those things are much more likely to lead to happiness in your life. Now, happiness is a very subjective term. I'm a big believer in Stoicism. You may know this from my tweets and what I've talked about in lifestyle medicine. I think Stoicism is an excellent philosophy to live life by, that ancient Greco-Roman philosophy. It's helped me a lot over the last 3 years combat the madness of the world and to distinguish between what's in your control and what's not in your control. You cannot change certain realities of humanity, of the madness of the world, but you can change how you respond to them. Stoicism is not a religion. It is a way of life, a philosophy compatible with any other religion out there. I'm going to be talking much more about this in future videos, but I would say having a philosophy that keeps you grounded, keeps you calm and understanding of the ways of the world without letting it affect you. And ultimately, emotional reactivity, which we've seen a lot of over the last 3 years, is not only detrimental on an individual level, it will make anybody very unhappy and at the complete mercy of forces around them, but it's also very bad for society. It leads to a completely degenerate society, of which you're seeing, unfortunately, right now, the consequences of a lack of stoicism in the world.
Man, thank you so much. And thanks for your wisdom and for sharing. And, this is a topic a lot of us don't even like to talk about, but I think it's so awesome what you're doing. And, every time I see you, I go, gotta have that guy out just to talk. Is it because I love that you stand up for what's right and you stand up for what you believe in, and that you do it with a smile too, and make a joke too, and make it people think a little bit. I think that's what we're called to do. How about people who want to track you down on YouTube or social media? How do they track you down?
Yeah, so I have a personal website, suneeldhand.com, that explains a lot about where I've come from, what I'm doing. My YouTube channel, which has grown a lot over the last 3 years, Dr. Suneel Dhand. I'm also on Twitter, as you know, Brian, same name, Dr. Suneel Dhand. I am on some of the other platforms, although not as much, like Instagram and Facebook. You can find me there. Thankfully, I have a unique name, so it's easy to find me. Go plug me into Google and follow my work. Hopefully you find something you like, anyone who's listening.
Yeah, and thank you so much. Thanks for joining me. It was an honor having you. And people listening, this was a graduate level degree talking about medicine and what's happening and what we're all seeing. And so, absorb some of this. It may be hard for some people to hear. And I know some people hate hearing what we're talking about. I get it. But I think sometimes we just are called to speak the truth, even though it's not popular and it may not be the the vogue thing at the moment, but I think that the tide is turning. And so be kind to yourself, be kind to others, have an open mind, and just think for yourself. Don't allow everyone else to tell you what to think, including ourselves. Just allow this to be a little seed, and then you can look into it, not look into it, throw it away. You can do what you want, but just live your life like we're talking about. Enjoy your life, laugh a little bit, go out for hikes, go do fun stuff. Live your life.
Very well said. Couldn't have said that better myself.
And Doc, thank you so much.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you for listening to this episode. We greatly appreciate your support. We would greatly appreciate a positive thumbs up on all of the platforms like iTunes and Spotify or wherever you're listening. And we just thank you for our Patreon supporters. We greatly appreciate your help in getting this message out. We think there's a lot of important information, and hopefully this helps you. Have a great day, and thank you for listening, and thank you for your support.